Did you know that one woman, yes, a single woman, helped solve one of the biggest problems of World War II? Without her, Britain might not have survived the Battle of Britain, and history could have looked completely different. This is the incredible story of Beatrice Tilly Schilling, the engineer and motorbike racer who saved the legendary Spitfire fighter plane from disaster. During World War II, the Supermarine Spitfire wasn't just another airplane, it was Britain's symbol of hope. With its sleek design, unmatched speed, and razor-sharp maneuverability, the Spitfire quickly became the pride of the Royal Air Force. Pilots adored it, the public cheered for it, and newspapers hailed it as the machine that could turn the tide of the war. To many, the Spitfire wasn't just metal and engines, it was Britain's guardian angel in the skies. But hidden beneath that shining reputation was a deadly secret. In the middle of dogfights with German Messerschmitt 109s, right when life depended on every move, the Spitfire S engine had a nasty habit of cutting out. Imagine a pilot diving to escape enemy gunfire, pulling off a sharp maneuver, and suddenly, silence. The roar of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine sputtering into nothing. No power, no control, just helpless freefall with a German fighter locked on your tail. So what was causing this terrifying failure? The answer lay in the Merlin's carburetor design. Unlike the German fighters, which ran on advanced fuel-injected engines, the Spitfire still used a traditional carburetor. On the surface, it was reliable. But in a nosedive, gravity became the enemy. Instead of feeding the engine smoothly, the fuel inside the carburetor sloshed away from the outlets. With no steady fuel supply, the Merlin would choke, sputter, and often stall completely. For pilots, this was more than a technical hiccup. It was a death sentence. In combat, seconds mattered. A stalled engine meant losing altitude, losing position, and often losing your life. German pilots knew this weakness well. Their Messerschmitts had no such limitation. With fuel-injected engines, they could dive steeply, recover smoothly, and stay glued to a British Spitfire struggling to restart its engine mid-air. It gave the Luftwaffe an edge that could have easily changed the course of the war. And yet, despite this flaw, the Spitfire fought bravely in the Battle of Britain. British pilots, knowing their aircraft's limitations, adapted their tactics. They relied on teamwork, used home field advantages, and found clever ways to avoid nosedives whenever possible. Still, the problem remained. Every time the Spitfire went nose down, the pilot's heart sank with it, praying the Merlin would come back to life before the enemy closed in. This issue wasn't confined to a handful of aircraft either. By 1940, Britain had already produced thousands of Spitfires and Hurricanes, all using the same Rolls-Royce Merlin engine with the exact same carburetor flaw. That meant nearly the entire Royal Air Force was flying into battle with a built-in weakness, and in the brutal skies over Europe, weaknesses could not be hidden for long. For Britain to truly stand a chance, this deadly problem had to be solved. The Spitfire's beauty and speed meant nothing if its engine betrayed the pilot at the worst possible moment. And as the war raged on, one question grew louder with every mission. Could someone, anyone, fix the Merlin's fatal flaw before it was too late? This flaw put British pilots at a terrifying disadvantage. In 1940, during the Battle of Britain, survival in the skies depended on lightning-fast maneuvers, sharp dives to escape enemy fire, and sudden climbs to line up a counterattack. Now imagine this. You're in the middle of a life-or-death dogfight. Bullets flying past your cockpit, you dive hard to shake off a Messerschmitt, and suddenly your engine sputters, coughs, and dies. You're falling through the sky, powerless, while your enemy calmly stays on your tail. That's the nightmare British pilots lived with every day. The problem was urgent, and everyone knew it. Rolls-Royce, the maker of the famous Merlin engine, threw its top engineers at the issue. The Royal Aircraft Establishment, the hub of British aviation science, joined in. Brilliant minds drafted diagrams, tested modifications, and tinkered with new carburetor designs. But nothing seemed to work. The engine flaw was stubborn, and every solution only introduced new problems. Time was running out. The situation was even more dire because the Royal Air Force had already committed to the Merlin engine across its fleet. By 1940, more than 20,000 aircraft had been produced with the same weakness, not just the iconic Spitfires, but also Hurricanes, which were just as essential in defending British skies. That meant nearly the entire British Air Force was flying with a handicap. Britain's fate literally hung in the balance. And then, just when the problem seemed unsolvable, help came from an unlikely source. Her name was Beatrice Schilling, but everyone called her Tilly. Tilly Schilling was no ordinary engineer. She was a pioneer in a world that didn't welcome women in technical fields. Born in the 1920s, she grew up at a time when society told girls to dream small, to stay away from mechanics, machines, and laboratories. But Tilly wasn't having any of it. She had a natural curiosity for how things worked, and more importantly, the determination to follow it wherever it led. As a teenager, she saved up to buy her own motorcycle, a Royal Enfield. Not content with just riding it, she took the engine apart, studied every component, and put it back together. Soon, she was fixing her own machines and modifying them for more speed. By the time she was in her teens, she could strip down a bike and rebuild it faster than most grown men. Her passion pushed her further. Against all odds, she applied to study engineering at Manchester University. At the time, this was unheard of. No woman had ever been accepted into the mechanical engineering program before. But Tilly broke through, becoming one of the first women in Britain to formally study mechanical engineering at a university level. She was a trailblazer, fearless both in the lab and on the racetrack. Yes, the racetrack. Tilly wasn't just an engineer, she was also a competitive motorcycle racer, known for tearing around the famous Brooklyn circuit at breakneck speeds. She lived for machines, and machines seemed to obey her in return. Little did anyone know, this unstoppable woman would soon solve a problem that Britain's best engineers had failed to fix. And in doing so, she would help change the outcome of World War II. Outside the classroom, Beatrice Tilly Schilling lived a second life, not as an engineer in a lab coat, but as a fearless motorbike racer. She owned a 490cc Norton motorcycle, and on weekends you could find her roaring around the famous Brooklyn's racetrack, a place dominated almost entirely by men. But Tilly didn't just race. She won respect. She was known for modifying her bike's carburetor, tweaking and tuning it until her machine hit blazing speeds that left competitors stunned. She wasn't satisfied with simply riding. She wanted to understand every nut, bolt, and piston and make it better. At the time, nobody could have imagined that these garage experiments, this love affair with mechanics, would one day change the outcome of World War II. Yet her obsession with engines gave her the exact knowledge Britain desperately needed when the country's survival was on the line. By 1939, Tilly had taken her passion for machines into a full-time career. She was working at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, one of the most important hubs for aviation research in Britain. Starting with technical writing, she quickly climbed the ranks. Her sharp mind, relentless curiosity, and refusal to accept limitations pushed her higher until she became a technical officer, a serious position in a field where women were still rare. And that's when the crisis hit. The Merlin engine, the pride of British aviation, was failing in combat. Pilots in Spitfires and Hurricanes were losing power mid-dive, their carburetors choking under the force of gravity. It wasn't just frustrating, it was deadly. German fighters had no such flaw, and every mission became a gamble with fate. The country's top engineers tried and failed. Rolls-Royce had poured in resources, and government labs had tested countless ideas, but the problem remained. It seemed unsolvable. And then Tilly Schilling asked for permission to tackle it herself. At first, no one took her seriously. She was just a woman in a male-dominated workplace, and many dismissed her with a smirk. But Tilly was not one to back down. She insisted on being given the chance, and once she had it, she worked with speed and precision. Her solution? Shockingly simple. She designed a small brass restrictor plate with a precisely drilled hole. By controlling the flow of fuel during a dive, it stopped the carburetor from flooding and cutting out. It wasn't a perfect fix. The Merlin still wasn't as smooth as a German fuel-injected engine, but it was good enough. Pilots could dive, recover, and keep fighting. That small brass plate meant the difference between life and death in the skies. The genius of Tilly's design wasn't just its effectiveness, it was its practicality. The plate was tiny, easy to manufacture, and could be installed right on the airfield without pulling the aircraft apart. Mechanics could fit it quickly, which meant hundreds of planes could be fixed in record time. With one brilliantly simple invention, Tilly Schilling had given British pilots back their edge. She proved that sometimes the boldest solutions come not from committees or corporations, but from one determined individual who refuses to accept defeat. The little brass plate designed by Beatrice Schilling quickly earned a nickname among pilots, Miss Schilling's Orifice. It might sound humorous, but for those who depended on it, this tiny piece of metal was no joke. It was a lifesaver. What made it so special was its simplicity. The restrictor plate didn't require expensive materials, complicated engineering, or long downtime in the hangar. Mechanics could fit it directly into the carburetor of a Spitfire or Hurricane right there on the airfield. No major overhauls, no weeks of redesign, just a quick installation, and the plane was back in the sky, ready for combat. But here's where Tilly's determination truly stood out. She didn't just design the solution and hand it over. She took it upon herself to make sure it reached the pilots who needed it most. Mounting her trusty motorcycle, she rode from base to base across Britain, carrying the plates herself. Imagine the sight. A woman in leather riding gear, speeding down country roads during wartime, not for leisure, but on a mission to keep the Royal Air Force in the fight. Wherever she arrived, she worked directly with crews to install the plates, ensuring every Spitfire and Hurricane could dive without fear of its engine cutting out. The impact was immediate. With Schilling's device fitted, British pilots gained back precious seconds in combat. No longer did their engines betray them in mid-dive. Now they could maneuver aggressively, chase German fighters, and escape deadly situations with far greater confidence. It didn't make the Merlin engine perfect, but it leveled the playing field. In the brutal chess game of aerial warfare, that was enough to turn the tide. As the war went on, Schilling didn't stop at a temporary fix. She continued her research and eventually helped develop a fully redesigned carburetor system that permanently eliminated the issue. By the time these upgrades were in place, the Spitfire had become one of the most feared aircraft in the skies, a symbol of British resilience. And at the heart of that transformation was the quiet brilliance of Beatrice Schilling. Pilots themselves gave her the highest praise. Many credited her with saving their lives. Others believed that without her quick solution, the Royal Air Force might have lost the air war over Britain altogether. In a conflict where every advantage mattered, Schilling's contribution quite literally helped Britain win the skies. For her work, Beatrice Schilling was awarded the Order of the British Empire. But her true legacy went far beyond medals. She had proven that brilliance knows no gender. At a time when engineering and aviation were overwhelmingly male-dominated, she shattered barriers and carved out a place for women in science and technology. She showed the world that determination, courage, and creativity could come from anyone willing to challenge expectations. Today, her story stands as a reminder. Sometimes history is changed not by armies or politicians, but by one individual, armed with nothing more than a sharp mind, a fearless spirit, and a simple piece of brass with a hole in it. Beatrice Schilling wasn't just a mechanic, she was a pioneer. She solved a problem that the best male engineers of her time couldn't crack, and in doing so, she helped shape the outcome of World War II. So the next time you hear about the legendary Spitfire, remember, behind that victory was a fearless woman, racing her motorcycle from base to base, making sure Britain stayed in the fight. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. What do you think the world would look like today if Beatrice Schilling hadn't stepped in? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.